We've talked already about the elements of a yearbook, but the elements of a newspaper are much different, and the format of our writing will be much different too. So it's time to consider the other part of our work as a publications class, what goes into the making of a newspaper article. Now, our target here is less about creating and more about at least knowing what each part of a newspaper is about. That way, you can play with the different pieces all throughout the year and make educated decisions about what to include and what not to include. At the basic level of this particular target, you can define the essential components of the newspaper. In other words, you'll be able to take a look at the terms that I'm going to go over and you can tell me what they are. 2 level, you can also tell me why they're important to a newspaper as a whole. At a 3 level, you can take a look at an actual newspaper and tell me what you see and how you know what it is. And at a 4 level, you can evaluate a newspaper. How well are they doing it, including the different types of newspaper articles, and how well are they following the different methods of creating stories. Okay, so we'll talk about types of content first, and then we'll talk about how that content is organized. There are 4 basic types of newspaper content. There's hard news, which is up-to-the-minute news and events. They're reported immediately, and of course social media has really aided in the ability for any news agency to be able to do this. These will be generally shorter stories, just giving the bare bones of what the event is about. There are feature stories, which are on the opposite end of the spectrum here. These are narrative style stories, or stories, if you want to think of it that way. They'd be more comparable to fiction. We're telling the story of a person or an event, which cover human interest topics. Things like people who are donating money to a good cause, or an animal that has done something extraordinary. There's analysis, which is a combination of hard news and feature. Generally, that will be the current news with analysis of the impact of the events. How is it impacting the people around it? And then there's the editorial. This is a personal opinion piece. You might think of it as a persuasive essay turned into a newspaper article. Now, that's the styles, but then of course there's the topics too. Human interest we already talked about. This is very much about lighthearted stories, or well, sometimes they can be serious and sad, but these aren't going to be, oh, there's an accident on such and such road. They're not going to be about scientific findings. These are going to be very emotional, would be probably a good way to think about it. Okay. And of course, there's sports, pretty straightforward. Business, again, pretty straightforward, just reports on businesses, what's going well for them, what's not, their gains and their losses. We won't have much of that going on in our Dansville paper, of course. Entertainment, this would be where we look at celebrity life, new music that's coming out, new games that are coming out, new movies that are coming out. Politics, again, pretty self-explanatory. And usually opinion pieces fall into that too, because people like to give their opinions, or their editorials, people like to give their opinions about politics. And then, of course, current events, which is a lot of your hard news, things that are going on right now that people need to know about. So we can consider how the different types of newspaper stories can apply to the different topics that you might see within stories. You can have a human interest that's hard news. Generally, you'd see that as like the lead to the full story to come. You're just giving your basic facts, and you usually follow that up with a stay tuned for more information kind of heading there. Hard news, though, can be sports, it can be business, it can be entertainment, it can be politics, it can be current events, because, of course, any of those can just be here are the bare facts of something that's happened around anyone, a celebrity or a business, anything. Feature stories tend to be more along the lines of human interest. You'll find it in sports if they're covering like a particular player. Business, if it's a business that's doing something really extraordinary and they want to do an in-depth report on them. Entertainment, again, if they're giving a really in-depth story about a certain person. And politics to that extent too, not so much on current events. Okay. Analysis, as a combination of hard news and feature, can really apply to pretty much anything, because you're going to give those basic bare bones and then talk about the impact on whoever else is involved. Editorial, you can find editorials related to sports, you can find editorials related to business practices, you can find editorials related to entertainment, although it's a little less common. Generally not applied to human interest, certainly applied to politics and current events. Now, there are 2 different structures that are frequently used within a newspaper article. These are called the inverted pyramid and the narrative style. The inverted pyramid is more common in hard news, and then you might see it in analysis too at the start, and it might then kind of switch into more of a narrative style. So we'll write that out here. In particular, it's going to apply best to hard news. So an inverted pyramid will start with the direct lead that will include who, what, when, and where. Okay, there's nothing fancy, there's nothing engaging here. We're just giving this is who is involved, this is what happened, this is when, and this is where, giving that basic information that people need to know if they need to avoid something or if they need to take action. Then we'll go into the most important details, what's most relevant for the general population to know, and then you can kind of fade away into those least important details, the minor details that people don't necessarily need to worry about. Again, most common in hard news, but you might see it as the start of an analysis piece as well. Narrative tends to feature an indirect lead, more descriptive language, and there will be a separate target that will talk more specifically about leads down the road, but know that for narrative style, you're going to do more than just the basic who, what, when, where. You're looking to be engaging here, and the same methods that you generally apply to hooks in an essay might also apply here. You'll have your information, but it will be details mixed with description, okay? So it's the who, what, when, and where, but it's also the impact, the emotion piece that will be mixed in there. And then the closing often features an impact or reflection on a greater scale, very similar to our so what that we talk about frequently in essays here, okay? This would be, of course, for most of the other styles. Now, editorial kind of falls under its own thing. That, again, I would really just compare to a persuasive essay. And you can follow that same basic format if you choose to write an editorial. All right, so that's just a quick introduction to the basics of newspaper. Again, there'll be more specifics about the structures of newspapers coming up, but this is that introduction for you, and you can now take a look at newspapers and see these inverted pyramids and narratives and the different types and contents of newspaper elements for yourself.